president's seems to be that tearing down statues leads to a slippery slope.
This week it's Robert E. Lee. I noticed that Stonewall Jackson's coming down. I wonder, is it George Washington next week? And is it Thomas Jefferson the week after? You know, you really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop?
Okay, well, I'll tell you where it stops. Somewhere. Anytime someone asks, where does it stop, the answer is always, fucking somewhere. You might let you...
Well, I'm sure John Oliver is very proud of himself for that incredibly lame take on where do you stop tearing down our nation's history. Of course, he doesn't care because he is a British twat. I would love to find John Oliver on the side of the road, broken down, in need of a ride, and I will offer him a ride. And when he tells me that this is my exit, and I drive past it, he would respond by, "Where are you taking me?" And I would just turn to him and smile and say, "Somewhere, John. Fucking somewhere." And see if that answer suffices to him. Something tells me it would not. But now we have from Steve Guest here, who is absolutely correct that this John Oliver segment aged poorly. It aged very poorly. So today, the DC government announced they were looking into the removal of the Washington Monument and the Jefferson Memorial. Yes, that is right. The Washington, D.C. government, the nation's capital, is looking to get rid of two of the most iconic monuments to our founding fathers. This is Orwell coming to life right in front of our eyes. The most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their own history. If this is not that, if the tearing down of some of our most iconic monuments to our founding father is not obliterating our own understanding of history because they're looking at it through a modern lens, then I don't know what is. But we have here from the Washington Post, the DC committee recommends stripping the names of Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Francis Scott Key, and others from city government buildings. If you cannot go to Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, to learn about the history of our nation, where can you go? Where can you take your kids to learn about how our government works and what our history is and how we were formed? If you tear down all of the monuments to our founding fathers and to all of our founding principles and leave nothing before the age of Barack Obama up, it is absolute tyranny. This is the Orwellian Marxist future being pushed upon us at this very, very moment. I remember my parents took me to Washington, D.C., me and my sister, when we were 9 years old. And we went to all the different monuments. We went to the different museums, the Smithsonian, all of these different places. And we learned about our nation's history through going to all these places, seeing all these monuments, and they want to tear these down because they are, what, offensive? So we have here, from the Washington Post, a committee reporting to D.C. Mayor Muriel E. Bowser recommends renaming dozens of public schools, parks, and government buildings in the nation's capital after studying the historical namesake's connections to slavery and oppression. So D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser is absolutely part of this push to just take a big eraser and just go like this to the history books and wipe it all away. Because if they're able to wipe away our history, they are able to... let's go back to another Orwell quote, actually, for this. Those who control the past control the present. Those who control the present control the future. And that is exactly what they are trying to do. They do not want the future of America to resemble the founding principles. And so they are looking at history through what is called presentism. And I normally don't ever use Wikipedia because it's normally a just haven for leftist garbage. They actually get it right here on what presentism is. In literary and historical analysis, presentism is the anachronistic introduction of present-day ideas and perspectives into depictions or interpretations of the past. Modern historians seek to avoid presentism in their work because they consider it a form of cultural bias and believes it creates a distorted understanding of their subject matter. The practice of presentism is regarded by some as a common fallacy when it comes to writing about the past. And it absolutely is, because it denies the human history of progression. It tries to erase all of history and create a new starting point, to create a new day one, where everything going forward is the result of that blank slate that they created, where we no longer learn from the mistakes that we made in the past. We don't even know about them anymore. That is what they want. So it takes away all of the progression of human history and creates a blank slate where they can create their own utopian vision. And this is the problem with the left, or it's one of many, many problems with the left. But they think that they can just, any idea that they have, so long as they're able to wipe the mind clean and socially engineer the people, that anything is possible, that there is no such thing as human nature, that there is no such thing as natural order, that the natural order is only a byproduct of cultural conditioning, which is absolutely not true. The culture and the progression of humankind reflects human nature, reflects natural order. But they don't want that because that limits what they can do with their power. So back to this article here. The honorees whom the committee says should not have public works named for them include Presidents Thomas Jefferson, James Monroe, Andrew Jackson, William Henry Harrison, John Tyler, Zachary Taylor, and Woodrow Wilson. While I don't necessarily think that Woodrow Wilson should have his name ripped off of any kind of historical monuments or anything, he is the least deserving, I think, of any president we've ever had. But not because of any kind of presentism approach, but because Woodrow Wilson was actually the founder of progressivism. I know some would say like Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive, but modern day progressivism was really instituted by Woodrow Wilson. And he took the Constitution and wiped his ass with it and threw it away. I mean, just look at some of the things Woodrow Wilson created. Under Woodrow Wilson, we created both the Federal Reserve and the income tax, both of which were unconstitutional. He was the first to conscript people into service in World War I. He also jailed journalists who spoke out against World War I, and was the first president to get us embroiled in wars that were not supposed to happen, or wars that were overseas and that we were not supposed to be engaged in. So I don't think Woodrow Wilson should be on any kind of monuments or buildings because he was the worst president ever, but not because of by any standards that we set today. He betrayed all of the standards of the founding principles. So I'm looking at that from a historical vantage point and what this country was supposed to be. He derailed this nation like no other president ever has. So others who would have their namesakes taken away from buildings would be revolutionary leader Benjamin Franklin. So what are we going to do? Take him off the $100 bill and replace it with Colin fucking Kaepernick? I'm sure there are people out there who would like to do that. Inventor Alexander Graham Bell, and the national anthem writer Francis Scott Key. We believe strongly that all District of Columbia-owned public spaces, facilities, and commemorative works should only honor those individuals who exemplified those values such as equity, opportunity, and diversity that D.C. residents hold dear. The committee's chairs, Bowser advisor Beverly Perry, and Public Library Director Richard Reyes Gavilan wrote in a letter introducing the report. Two things. One, who the hell are these people to say what DC residents hold dear? As if DC residents are a monolith who all believe the same thing. Well, I mean, honestly, that is probably truer in DC than anywhere else because DC has, 6% registered Republicans? So if you wonder where all of the DC bureaucratic power lies, it's in the Democratic Party. But they do not get to say that, for one. Second of all, let's talk about the values that they're saying all these DC residents espouse. One, equity. That is the big one. Now, a lot of people think that equity and equality are the same thing. Equity and equality are far from the same thing. So what are the difference? Let's go to difference. This is from differencebetween.com, and we have difference between equity and equality, and they do a pretty good job just in their first sentences breaking down the differences. So let's start with equality, actually, and then we'll go to equity. So equality can be defined as treating each other and every individual in the same manner, irrespective of needs and requirements. This is to say that whatever the necessity of the individual is, it is ignored to promote the ideals of fairness and equal treatment. I am completely on board with equality. But let's see what equity is. Equity can be defined as the quality of treating individuals fairly based on their needs and requirements. This does not denote that an equal amount should be distributed to each and every individual. On the contrary, it highlights that things should be distributed based on needs. Now, does that sound familiar? Do you hear the echoes of a famous historical quote in that? Maybe that quote goes something along the lines of, "From each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs." From Karl Marx. Equity is rooted in Marxism, and we are seeing this in the anti-racist agenda, this anti-racism thing that has cropped up. It is not about just not being racist. It is not about equality. It is rooted in the ideals of equity, which are Marxist in nature. That's why we have Ibram X. Kendi, the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, talks about how discrimination that creates inequity is bad, but discrimination that creates equity is good. So when you talk about equity, you have to understand it from its ideals of distribution. So any kind of discrimination that creates equity, that means allows them to redistribute, is good. And they will discriminate based on things like race. It is rooted in racism. Anti-racism is rooted in racism, because that is what the left always does. They always give things names that are the exact opposite for what they are actually doing. It's the Saul Alinsky rules for radicals. Always, and it's tied into the Saul Alinsky rules for radical. I guess it's the cousin of that rule that always accuse your political opponent of exactly what you're doing. It's always name what you're doing the exact opposite of what it actually is. It is subversive, it is deceitful, it is dishonest, and it is disgusting. So, let's go back to this this Washington Post article here. We believe strongly. Yeah, again, what right do they have to tell people what people hold dear? That is just them hijacking the conversation and saying that it is what DC residents want. And first of all, DC is not, it's a territory that does not have representation. It is the nation's capital first and foremost, a city second. So they do not get to go ahead and erase American history for all of the nation because of what the DC residents want. I'm sorry, but if you live in Washington, D.C., it comes along with some trade-offs that you do not get the full representation that you would elsewhere because it is the center of the federal government. So the recommendations would begin a lengthy process of deciding which buildings to rename across the city. Bowser convened the committee after large-scale Black Lives Matter protests began in the district following the death of George Floyd in late May. This is purely reactionary. This is the mob demanding something, and then the cowards in government just bending to their will, bending the knee. And who knows, maybe it's not bending the knee. Maybe they are the ringleaders. It's tough to tell. It's tough to tell with these people who's really in charge of who. At the time, she said she would support renaming Woodrow Wilson High School, a prominent public school whose name has long been a contentious subject among students and alumni. I think there's supposed to be a period right there. Again, I have less of a problem renaming anything after Woodrow Wilson, but not because of any sort of presentism bias, not because of any sort of modern day lens, but because he actually derailed the founding principles more than any other president in history. And so he simply does not deserve it. I mean, it's like we don't see anything for James Polk. our 10th president. Why? Because he wasn't a memorable president. Same with Woodrow Wilson. I mean, sure, he was memorable, but for all the wrong reasons. And that is not from not from a present standpoint, not from presentism, but from a founding principle standpoint. The committee said in its report that considered aspects of the honorees' history, including whether they owned slaves or supported the institution of slavery, whether they created laws and policies that disadvantaged women and minorities, whether they belonged to any supremacist organization, and whether they discriminated against marginalized groups in a way that would violate DC law. Now think of what American society, and really any society anywhere in the world, where they were in the 1800s. This whole idea of multiculturalism did not exist anywhere in the world. We were not some country in violation of some universal sanction of multiculturalism. It didn't exist. And in most places in the world today, it still doesn't exist. Go to Japan as a white person. There are many things that you cannot do, many jobs that you cannot get. Go to South Korea, where they believe that the Korean people are the supreme race. There are many places in the world that do not live up to this. In fact, the only places in the world that actually do are Western civilization. We are the only civilizations that actually have embraced some level of multiculturalism. And the way that I look at it is that you can't have completely disparate cultures living together. Now, you can have people from different cultures that come and accept or come and appreciate American culture. I think of it this way. This is the analogy that I use. You know, you can prepare chicken 8,000 different ways, but you're still eating chicken. You can come to America from any other place and any other culture. So long as you still come here to be American, you can flavor it with whatever other culture you came from. But you still have to respect the founding principles. You still have to respect the Constitution. You still have to respect the Bill of Rights. And you still have to respect that this is a nation that was formed under a Christian-informed background. We are informed by Christianity. You don't have to be a Christian to appreciate that. You don't have to be a Christian to have a certain reverence for the Christian ideals that informed the founding of this country, that informed the ideals of individual liberty, of personal freedom, of personal prosperity, of self-governance. You don't have to be a Christian to at least have a reverence that those are formed out of Christianity. But we don't have that sort of complex, nuanced thinking anymore. Everything is, does something offend me, and if so, tear it down. We have had enough. And there is no chance in hell that the Washington Monument and Jefferson Memorial are going anywhere. You want to talk about seeing people, militias come out and rise up? There will be bloodshed in the streets before that ever happens. I can almost guarantee that. People will not stand for that. Yeah, or any other way that would violate DC law. See, that right there, you can see the presentism right there. So they would rename anything that disadvantages women and minorities, blah, 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 or against marginalized groups in a way that would violate DC law. Modern day DC law. That is the absolute manifestation of presentism, and it has very real effects for our future. It is the erasure of everything that we know about America, because they did not live up to our current standards. No, people in the past never live up to the standards of the current culture. That doesn't mean you destroy them and erase them from the history books, because you are going to repeat the same mistakes, and that's what they want. They want to actually be able to reinstate slavery. And you can see this. You can see this plainly by how they never call out communist China, which actually uses slavery. These people do not care about slavery. They do not care about the history of slavery. They do not care about black people. They do not care that it was black people that were enslaved. They want to erase everything that we learned from slavery so that they can create a totalitarian, authoritarian regime that is fine with using slavery, because China is the model, and China is a slave state. Sure, there are plenty of people there that live free and clear and live really great, prosperous lives. That's about 200 million out of 1.4 billion. The rest of them are slaves. These people want to be that 200 million in China, and they want us to be the 1.2 billion that are slaves. They don't hate slavery. They just don't like that they're not the ones in charge, that they're not the ones in power, and that they don't get to hold that power over anybody that disagrees with them. That is what this is all about. So the commemoration on a District of Columbia asset is a high honor reserved for esteemed person with a legacy that merits recognition, the group wrote. Okay, so commemoration on a District of Columbia asset is a high honor reserved for esteemed persons with a legacy that merits recognition. Thomas Jefferson literally wrote the Declaration of Independence. How does that not qualify him for being an esteemed person with a legacy that merits recognition? He literally founded the Declaration of Independence. Or literally wrote it. Or he was one of the primary writers. He wasn't the only one, but he was the primary writer on the Declaration of Independence, and they are saying that because he owned slaves, that he no longer deserves that. That is more important than enshrining the first government in history that allowed for self-governance, that enshrined personal liberty, personal prosperity, and freedom. That goes to show you right there how little regard they hold freedom in, how little regard they hold the entire ethos of America. To them, it is an absolute throwaway because they didn't fully live up to the modern day standards. Kiss America goodbye, everybody. If these people ever get power, that is it for America. I don't know. All I know is that we got to fight. And I'm not talking about fight in the streets. We're all waiting for November 3rd to find out what happens. And we already know what's going to happen. They're going to use mail-in balloting to undermine any sort of faith in the election. We already have John Podesta wargaming it out, saying that under no situation is he going to... he was playing Joe Biden, and under no situation would he allow for Joe Biden to surrender. Or to concede. That's the word I was looking for. To concede. In fact, he would actually go to the West Coast states and try to talk them into seceding from the Union before Joe Biden conceding the presidency to Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton just came out and said that under no situation should Joe Biden concede the race. You have to see where this is going. This is going to civil war. I don't think there's any other way. If we have these Democrats, these deep state establishment Democrats, saying that there is no way they are going to accept the results that Donald Trump wins again, and that they are undermining any kind of faith in the election so that there's no way that Trump voters would accept it if Biden wins the election. We are on pace or on track for an absolute collision course. We are two trains on one track going opposite directions at full speed. And November 3rd, we will be crashing. So I hope you guys are ready, because these people would rather see America burn than lose their grip on power. And people wonder why I'm so hyper-focused on the idea that this is all rooted in communism. Because communism is the totalitarian grasp on power, and that is exactly what they are demonstrating to us. Anyways, guys, please go ahead and hit the like video. I know it's hard to actually like this, but, at least maybe you can like that I'm calling it out. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Parler at Ram Thorburn. And if you would, please consider contributing to the channel. I could certainly use the money. There are links to my Subscribestar, Patreon, and PayPal down in the description below. Anyways, guys, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.